Good evening, everyone. I'm sure Jalissa did a great job going over the zero tolerance policies and the background of school discipline. I am going to summarize the article first, then I'm going to talk about restorative justice practices in schools. Then I will discuss the challenges that come with restorative justice and further discuss social work and school discipline. So hopefully you read the article and found it interesting. To summarize the article, it is a topic that is close to my heart because school discipline and suspensions in particular disproportionately affect the disability population and particularly my son who has an IEP. Which means that he's that much more vulnerable to be suspended, and the suspensions can begin as early as preschool. Summarizing the article, zero tolerance policies negatively affect all children. Suspensions negatively affect all children, and they disproportionately affect students of color, students with disabilities, and students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So just one suspension can lead to a much higher risk of dropouts, of repeating a grade, of lower reading skills, and ultimately being in contact with the juvenile or criminal court system. Restorative justice would be eliminating zero tolerance and be used instead. Restorative justice focuses on working with students. It's a holistic approach, and it is a really broad term, so it is hard to define. But mostly it emphasizes understanding harm, accountability, repairing relationships, and at its core is community engagement. When suspensions happen, usually those children disassociate from school and from their community, which is really harmful. Restorative justice encourages participation and collaboration. So it's the opposite of a punitive measure where the student is taken out of the school. There are many benefits of restorative practices in education. It reduces suspensions and expulsions. It makes relationships between students and staff stronger. It also promotes accountability and conflict resolution. It keeps students engaged within the school and their community. And what I find most important, it supports social emotional learning, which children, they don't learn at school and nobody teaches them at home. Restorative justice in practice, it's not a one size fits all solution. Its main goal is prevention, teaching social emotional skills, fostering an environment where everyone, all students feel valued, heard, and understood. So when I heard that, I was thinking of Pat's church to some extent. The restorative methods are restorative circles. It can be mediation or restorative agreements where students take accountability and work towards solutions. I found a really cool school example. It's East High School that partnered with the University of Rochester's Center for Urban Education Success. And this is an effort that is ongoing. They voted on it until June of 2025. Unfortunately, it has not been renewed. And this is an educational partnership organization or an EPO. Before I share with you about East High School, I wanted to show you a TED Talk that is about restorative justice practices. It is presented by Leila Fakouri, and she explains how zero tolerance and restorative justice practices directly affect students.
In the wake of school tragedies like the Columbine shooting, zero tolerance was made popular to prevent students from bringing drugs and weapons to school. The policy, though, is now used to punish students for anything that faculty and teachers deem as misconduct. Schools that are governed by zero tolerance do not treat deviance on a case-by-case basis. This means that administration does not take into account the hardships that students struggle with at home and in their personal lives, which directly affects their behavior. Students have been suspended or expelled for occurrences ranging all the way from sleeping in the classroom to sharing food at lunch to cursing in class to possessing tobacco products on campus. Unfortunately, this novel idea of kicking the troublemakers out of school did not solve the problems of those individual students or the campus. However, many progressive schools and administrators have begun to shed light on new practices to combat the antiquated nature of zero tolerance. Restorative justice has been highlighted as one of the most effective methods to reverse the damage done. Restorative justice seeks to encourage accountability, repair harm, and restore relationships, rather than require retribution for wrongdoing. This is most commonly done by bringing the victim, the perpetrator, and those in the community who are harmed together in circle, where they may respectfully share their perspectives, feelings, and concerns. Through my research and personal experience, I've found that if we were to replace zero tolerance with restorative justice in schools, we would find three distinct improvements: a rise in positive student interactions, a drop in disciplinary problems, and a narrower school to prison pipeline. Let me tell you why. Restorative justice, especially when implemented at a young age, trains students to express themselves in constructive ways. One of the main deficiencies among newer generations is our inability to express ourselves through words. Many young people refuse to let themselves be vulnerable and say when they felt disrespected or embarrassed by the actions of their peers. When they're unable to communicate, they resort to fighting and misbehaving to show what's really going on inside. Let me break down an example of how restorative justice would work in this situation. Imagine two students get into a fight. They would be brought together in a circle with a facilitator and any other student who felt harmed. Here they would have a discussion that would let them recognize the root cause of the problem. It would also humanize both sides, giving students the chance to understand each other more. Restorative justice is not necessarily the answer to every form of misbehavior, but it does use a holistic process to identify the psychological and environmental issues that prompt students to act out, more effectively ending the cycle of bad behavior.
East High achieved a better school climate. I wanted to show you how they did it. So the elements of the University of Rochester EPO plan that focused on restorative justice practices. So here you can see engaged, active students. It places students squarely at the center of the schooling experience. And then it says expanded social and emotional support, promoting and implementing a vision for social and emotional health using a restorative justice approach with systematic support of counselors, social workers, and comprehensive health services. And it also recognizes families as true partners, which I am a believer that the only way you can support children and students is by first supporting families. Students are not going to be able to achieve any success without having support for their families as well. So the whole family unit has to be supported. And now I'll show you exactly what was achieved since this plan has been put in practice. It started in 2014, and then I have data for the 2020-2021 school year. This is an article by the Warner School of Education about extending the U of R's partnership with East High through this educational partnership organization. So here you can see that the four-year graduation rate has risen from 33% in 2014-15 to 85% in 2021. Suspensions dropped 90%, dropout rate decreased and attendance increased. This was only what 6 years of this partnership has done. This partnership will end in June 2025. Even though it is ending, I'm still hopeful that they have successfully applied these restorative justice practices. I want to show you how some states have already eliminated zero tolerance policies. Michigan and Minnesota are one of the few that have completely gotten rid of the zero tolerance policies. California has zero tolerance, but it also has restorative justice requirements. If we look at our state, which I will talk about more in a bit, the only thing it shows is zero tolerance being in effect. But this is not entirely true because some schools, just like I mentioned before, are using restorative justice practices. I found a great article that explains how now that restorative justice practices have been implemented in schools for quite a few years now, there is still issues, of course. To me, it feels that zero tolerance is one end of the spectrum, and then restorative justice is the complete other extreme. This article that was published in Colorado about the misimplementations and challenges of restorative justice in education mostly discussed how there can be top-down mandates. These mandates can conflict with restorative justice values. Now, there can also be a very narrow focus. Sometimes they only emphasize a single restorative practice. It is not going to change the school climate. It can be harmful if you only use one restorative justice practice and you're not using it holistically. A lot of approaches ignore systemic marginalization, taking into account those populations that are most vulnerable to suspensions, for example. But there seems to be little support for implementation, and teachers might feel lost. They may not feel supported. Lots of mistakes will most likely have to happen at first. Also, there can be lack of funding and consistency. The example of East High, even though the program ends in June of this year, hopefully they can still keep going. But if it means that lack of funding is going to now jeopardize everything that they have accomplished. Also, even though we know that zero tolerance policies are not supporting students and do not meet their needs, I can see both sides. Unfortunately, there's limited data on effectiveness, even though there is clear evidence that zero tolerance policies cause more harm than benefits. Let's get to the part of social work and school discipline. As social workers, we can influence school discipline on all levels. We can work with students, we can work with parents, we can work with families, we can work with organizations, and we can advocate for policy change. There are lots of challenges. New York has a zero tolerance policy, and you can get suspended up to 180 days, which is a full school year. And this can start in preschool. So I'll show you a little slide. Right here you can see school suspensions, and these are specific to Monroe County. This is for 23-2024 school year. A wide range of behaviors can cause suspensions, including minor infractions if you're late to class or you're adhering to the dress code. It begins as early as preschool. Some of the short and long-term impacts of suspensions: lower math and reading scores, decreased school trust and identification with school, and an increased risk of dropout and criminal justice system involvement, the school to prison pipeline that we have discussed. This is data by the Children's Agenda. They have this data through FOIL requests. I actually have the raw data for this. If anybody's interested, I'm happy to share it. In Monroe County, 1,548 students were suspended last school year, including 832 in preschool to grade 3. In Monroe County, Black students suspended 4.1 times as often as white students. Students with disabilities suspended 1.9 times as often as general education students, and economically disadvantaged students were suspended 3.7 times as often as students who are not economically disadvantaged. Now we get to my favorite part, which is the Solutions Not Suspensions bill. What this bill asks for is to include restorative approaches to discipline, limit use of suspensions in pre-K through third grade to only the most serious behaviors. Many states have already implemented this change to the law, shorten the maximum length of suspension from 180 to 20 school days, prohibit suspensions for minor infractions, require that students who are suspended receive academic instruction and the opportunity to complete assignments, take exams, and earn credit, and require charter schools to follow state education laws. Charter schools do not have to comply with New York State education laws. 24 states have already enacted similar legislation, and 17 states have enacted similar legislation limiting suspensions by grade levels. That means preschool through third grade. This bill is supported by the Children's Agenda local advocacy group. You may have heard me talk about them before. Some ideas for the solutions and how to implement restorative justice would be to not only expand it to schools, but also communities, utilize social workers for trauma-informed care and conflict resolution, and shift to a more student-centered, equitable discipline approach. I wanted to show you a really quick video, what suspensions do and what locally the work group that I'm involved with does.
Some of them give up, some of them will stop, and we want to help them. So we know that suspension is not the solution.
Parents are demanding changes to how schools punish students. The Solutions Not School Suspensions bill is co-sponsored by State Senator Samra Brook.
Tonight, dozens of people here in Rochester are calling on state lawmakers to pass it. News 10 NBC's Marcia Gustin spoke with students, parents, and advocates at the Children's Agenda event. Marcia?
Nikki and Brett, this is a call to action. Students and parents shared their stories about school suspensions, the inequities, and the effects on students. Many I spoke with today say suspensions do more harm than good.
Suspensions don't help anything. It's more of a punishment instead of a solution.
It's the stories of people who say they are directly impacted by the negative consequences of school suspensions. Tuesday night, they came together to find solutions that focus on helping students instead. Sahira Dillard is a student in the Rochester City School District. She was suspended for 40 days for an altercation with another student.
Suspension affects students mentally. It drains them. It diminishes every single bit of confidence.
16 states have already banned suspensions and expulsions in pre-kindergarten through third grade. Parents believe it's time for New York State to take similar steps. Tiana Johnson says her son was suspended when he was just 3 years old.
He had special needs, and instead of exploring, what supports or services that could be done, he was initially suspended.
According to a report by the Children's Agenda, analyzing data from the New York Department of Education from all school districts in New York, more than 135,000 students were suspended during the 2021 to 2022 school year, and close to 900,000 days of school were lost to suspensions. Black and Hispanic students were up to 5 times more likely to be suspended than white students. Similar rates were found for students with disabilities and from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Larry Marks, CEO of the Children's Agenda, says reducing suspensions would help end the school to prison pipeline.
A child who is suspended once is far more likely to fail classes, far more likely to not graduate high school, and far more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system.
Larry went on to say suspensions create a disengagement from school and a lack of interest. Advocates say the Solutions No Suspension bill will encourage schools to find supportive ways for kids to learn from their mistakes. It would shorten the maximum length of suspensions from 180 days, which is a full school year, to 20 school days. Brad.
I hope you enjoyed this video. I have included in one of the slides the petition that you can sign to support the Solutions Not Suspensions bill. And to conclude, what we all talked about is you can see how zero tolerance policies are very harmful. They may be sometimes necessary, but restorative justice practices are very effective, as we have witnessed from the East High example. My hope is that we are all involved on all levels of social work, that we advocate effectively, that we educate staff and family members about restorative practices, about social emotional skills, and that we support student needs and learn to listen more than talk. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to pass it on now to Ben, who I'm sure is going to do a great job. If you have any questions, please let me know. Shoot me a text.